Hey, welcome this evening. We're starting over after a small glitch. Someone breaking into the video, putting some really bad stuff on it while I was doing the video. So didn't quite know how to get out of all of it right away. So I just stopped the video and started over. Uh, won't have anybody joining us on this, although we did have 3 or 4 people earlier who was interested until this weirdo showed up. But anyway, we're in the process of uh, looking at trust and communication. And so I want to kind of continue that uh, program because let me get some water right here while my voice is a little raw from yelling at the computer earlier. There we go. Anyway, this is a pretty important segment, so I didn't want to let it go by, so we can put it back on and redistribute it to those folks who joined me earlier. I apologize for that interference, but I'm going to rework the training portion of this program anyway, so you can have a take a look at it. It's about trust and how to build trust, and the use of communication as a vehicle to do that. So let me just get up here and share my screen with you for a second. We'll get in here and kind of set up the program here so you can take a look at it. Let's see here. There we go. Let's see if we can put that back where it needs to be there so I'm not in the way while I'm talking to you. This is building trust through effective communication. I've used this a whole lot. I designed it, well, you can see back in 1999, and I used it for years and years. And it is by far, if there is a magic bullet to effective leadership, this is it. This is something you want to get a handle on and grasp. It'll help implement much of what we've learned up to this point and much of what will happen after this point. So this is one reason why I want to go back and finish this up. So let's just go ahead and take a look at what I mean by communication. And we all kind of take for granted communication is so simple, and leaders specifically just feel like they're great communicators. And I find that really interesting because a lot of the time when I go out and actually sit down with employees and talk to them about what their leaders say and do, and come back and share that feedback with the leader, and then combine that with like a 360-degree sort of third-party anonymous survey along these same areas of communication and trust, etc. The leaders are, well, I call it a wake-up call, and the leaders wake up to the fact that maybe they aren't as good a communicator as they thought they were up to this point. So let's take a look at what happens in a real basic interpersonal communication at the real base core of it. We're going to start with this lady who's interested in communicating a message to this guy over here. And as you see, this is just really the mechanics of it. We'll talk about some barriers next. But it's important for you to kind of see what happens when you communicate, even at a basic level. So this lady has a message that she wants this guy to hear. And when she creates that message, we delve all the way back into those first few chapters about culture and ethics and morals and belief systems and expectations and attitudes that people have. They bring all of that into the communication process. So when she has this particular message or thought that she wants to get across to this guy. She is formulating that, at least most people, until they have this feedback that I give leadership, but most people tend to formulate their communication based on their values, their beliefs, their attitudes about how things ought to be. So when she creates this message, I'll try to keep from choking up here. I've been talking a lot tonight. When she creates this message, she then sends it to this guy. Now, when you send a message, you normally send it with the verbal communication portion of this. So what's happening here is she is sending some words that represent her message to this man. In addition, she is sending nonverbal communications. If they were face to face and she was sending this message to this man, there would also be a nonverbal component to this message, and that's facial expressions, intonations, body movements, those kinds of things. In this case, we have them on the phone, so we've already created a technical barrier, if you will, to the communication process. We are sort of eliminating maybe 99.9% of the nonverbal communication. You might still be able to pick up some intonations or some variance in voice, pitch, or whatever, and that would send a nonverbal signal outside of just the specific words that were used to communicate her message. Now, if you haven't guessed this already, and probably have, but if you haven't guessed this already, when this guy hears this message, and what little bit of nonverbal he may be getting, not very much, he hears that message and interprets it using his values, his belief systems, his attitudes, his expectations about the meaning of this message. So if you want to understand how this person is going to hear what you're saying, you should probably know a little bit of something about them, which is not a trait that leaders tend to apply very much. So what happens is the person then hears this message. So now here's an interesting point that I want to bring up just about this right here. Now, if this person has a message they want to deliver, but they want it to go out to millions of people, so they put it on Twitter. And Twitter, by definition, definitely takes all of the nonverbal meaning out of the interaction and focuses on very, very few words. So in a written format, not even where you can pick up voice intonations or anything. And this person then is going to try to interpret that tweet premised on his value systems, and you created that tweet with your value systems. So what technology has done with things like social media, it's shortened the communication process and taken out of that a lot of it, the nonverbal aspect of it. Now, research has shown that when a person is communicating, for the message to be clear, there has to be some congruency or some congruence or similarity between the nonverbal cue that's being sent by the person and the verbal message. Now, let me kind of give you an example of what I mean by that. Let me widen out my screen a little more. Okay, now here's the deal. I'm going to send you a message. It's going to have a verbal context to it, a verbal meaning, and it's also going to have a nonverbal connotation or meaning to it. And all you need to do is tell me what your first instinct is, what you think I mean, what comes to your mind first about what you think I mean. So here we go. Here is the message. Yes. Now, I will tell you this. I don't know what you said, but I will tell you that well over 80 and sometimes as high as 90% of everybody I talk to in groups, when I do that and ask them simply to write down their first instinct, the vast majority of them, well over 75%, consistently say no. Okay, because I'm shaking my head, and it's that nonverbal no that people send a signal with. So when you take the uh, video contact, the visual contact away from uh, the message, and you're focusing strictly on posts and tweets and whatever else you tend to use, Instagram pictures and messaging and whatever you do that minimizes communications to very few words, and most of the time takes out nearly all of the nonverbal communication, and you're expecting this person to understand this the same way you do. Now, what's missing on something like a tweet or a post or something like that is the second part of the communication process, which is the feedback loop, where the person basically does the same thing that the woman does. He sends back a message saying, or a response to the message that the woman sent, with a nonverbal feedback loop. But of course, in this, we have also taken out the nonverbal for him. So really what we're down to is just a few verbal contacts, and this person is responding to this individual, and she can get from that feedback whether he is perceiving that message the way she wanted him to perceive it. Now, take that take that out. If we go back and take this out of the picture and just rely on tweets, you can understand when someone as important as the President of the United States uses a communication concept that eliminates half of what is important about understanding the communication. You can understand why he's in trouble all the time and why everybody is so confused about what he says, because he gets a message, or he sends a message, and there's no feedback. It just sits there and lingers, and then it's left up to the media, and then he wonders why the media puts their bent or their perspective on it from their value structure, and he wonders why everything is so bad and everybody's all upset. So there's a real good definition for you of how communication happens on the very, very basic level. Now, magnify this by groups of people, a team, into a department with various department sections, into a department in the midst of a company with several departments, both internationally and domestically based people, uh, and then take that up to states, and then take that up to the United States, and then take that up to countries having the same issue, so that you really begin to understand how difficult it is to truly negotiate a denuclearization with someone like South Korea or North Korea and Iran. It is a significant issue because trust is not established, and it's not established because of first of all, the mechanics of the communication aren't adhered to for effective communication. Okay, so what are some kind of barriers that evolve out of that communication process, as well as just become natural barriers to communication. Let's take a look at an internal one, be with cultural differences. So if the guy was a black man and the woman was a white woman, we have uh, uh, the cultural variance between a black minority and a white female. Okay. And so those cultural variances may be a real problem. Education could be a problem if you have a PhD wanting to study the theory and science of how robots might work online. Uh, on an assembly line, and that PhD goes down to gather information from a lady who has graduated from high school, maybe, and is accountable for simply getting 10 widgets out to the standard. That PhD person may have a real problem interfacing and getting that person to understand what they're saying about the dynamics of going into AI and things like that to make that line more efficient. So there's an example of education. Of course, the gender, we have the male-female situation. That could be a particular problem, particularly if the female feels slighted that she's not being paid as much or whatever, or she sees things differently than someone else. Gender is mostly focused around equality of pay, etc., probably less about culture and competence and those kinds of things, because women are very much on the same level playing field. Psychologically, there could be issues about what's going on in the department. Is there frustration? Is morale down? Does someone have a particular issue with maybe they're going through a divorce or something like that? So those are internal barriers. So think about those for a second. So we have the mechanics. We have the mechanics of that communication process be an issue, but we also have these internal barriers that might pop up. And then we have external barriers that might be a problem. And those might be things like the environment or what's going around. So if you're trying to hold a meeting and you're holding the meeting in the middle of the cafeteria where during lunch, and you're trying to get a complicated problem solved by getting people to integrate and commit, uh, some brainstorming and thought processes, and all you hear is a rattling of silverware, a lot of giggling, laughing, and people talking about something that's totally different than the topic area, then your environment is not real conducive for good communication for that team. You have the organizational issue where you have one department who is sees things differently, structured differently. The collegial, team-oriented Silicon Valley format is very conducive to openness and idea generation, or you have a very highly restricted hierarchical structure like the military that it's a top-down structured and this is the way it's going to be, etc. There are technical issues like the one I ran into today with this meeting, where I couldn't quite get this person was throwing some really bad stuff on the air while I was on there. I just, I didn't have the technical knowledge to understand how to take that person out of the system quickly. I hadn't taken the time to do that because I hadn't run into it. And so consequently, that technical problem got in the way of me trying to get this meeting over the way I wanted it to be, and will restructure how I'm going to hold a meeting in the future, because the culture that we're dealing with is one of perversion out there today, and it's freewheeling. Add with that you can do it openly on a program that's a technical issue when you do it on the internet. So effective communication really becomes a necessary component to building trust. It is truly the medium, the vehicle for helping people to build trust. But what is trust about, really? So, before we talk about the components of trust, I'd kind of like to talk about the thing that most influences trust, and that is the ability to do harm to each other. When that is unbalanced, when you have one person who can do more harm than another person, you just see trust dissolve away. It's difficult to see it um, surviving when you have that much imbalance. So let's take a look at a few things as examples of that. First of all, trust is affected by the perceived ability of each party to harm the other party. How much ability that person has to harm someone else. And if that's balanced, then you have some doors that open, allow people to trust each other. When it's unbalanced, you have basically those doors slam and you don't have much trust. So, for example, when one person gains something over someone else, you know, when there's balance between who gets the rewards or something, uh, people tend to trust each other. But if one person gets all the rewards and another person gets no rewards, and that person who gets no rewards can't do anything about it, then there's a perceived ability for that one person to harm the person who doesn't get rewards. So that's just one example. And then you have information sharing. Information is a very powerful tool out there today, and it carries with it a lot of weight. So when you have someone who withholds information, controls information, etc., versus sharing the information, distributing it equally across everybody, you have a lot of distrust. There is probably no better educational lab about this trust building scenario I'm talking to you about than the White House right now. You have people stabbing each other in the back. Some people believe some people have so much more power, and that would be perceived authority over someone else, along with controlling the information and not providing everything or backing up. And one person says one thing, the president comes back in, or somebody else comes back in and refutes that and makes them look like a jerk. Uh, and consequently, you know, some people get special privileges and others don't. You can see how this concept plays and what's going on in the White House. So, what is a result of that? You have a tremendous amount of turnover and people leaving with embittered attitudes who go out there now and say what they feel. You saw that in Comey's book. You saw that in a speech that Tillerson made to a college commencement exercise recently. You can pick those tones up. You have people like Omarosa, who was that reality star that Trump brought with him, and she went back on a reality show and went crazy talking about this kind of stuff. So there basically can't be any trust if these influencers, this influencer of harm, it is not balanced real well. So, what are the characteristics of trust? I have five things that begin with the letter C. I call them the five C's that I want you to these more than anything else, and they come from Warren Bennis's book, Leaders, which I encourage you to get and read. It's written a long time ago, but I encourage you to get it and read. You can see from the copyright on the slide, it was before 1999. So, but it's a tremendous book, and these have proven so true over the years. So let me give you the first one. The first characteristic of trust in a leader is consistency. Now, consistency focuses on being congruent when communicating. We've talked about that, living up to your commitments, behaving consistently, treating employees the same, and administering policies equally. Consistency builds trust because it allows employees to predict the leader. Predictability leads to credibility, which is critical for trust to be established. You can see how communication, this is about the only way you can get this done. These characteristics implemented through effective communication. It's the one thing, if you change quickly, you learn how to change it, and you change quickly, makes a difference. The next one is congruency, or being congruent. Now, we've talked about that. Being congruent means your behavior reflects your statements. Actions associated with behaviors allow for predictability, which builds trust. Leaders that don't behave congruently often make such statements as, "I stated my concern. I don't understand why the employees continue to behave the way they did." See, he is perceiving, just because he said it, they understood it correctly. So you see how that communication model breaks down, particularly if you take the nonverbal side of it out. So he may have said it, and often leaders' nonverbal behavior differs from verbal directives. In other words, it's how a leader is saying something, not what they are saying, that causes the incongruence. So a lot of times they will say the right words, like they might say in a meeting, "Employees are our greatest assets," and 6 months later have a layoff, or what they call a right sizing or downsizing, which would appear very incongruent to the person who's being laid off anyway. Okay, compassion. Now, there's something about compassion that I'll talk to you about in a second, but compassion requires a leader to be an active listener. You have to hear what the other person's saying and know a little about them in order to interpret what they're saying effectively, so that you understand where they're coming from. And compassion indicates to the employee a sense of concern and caring. That's what compassion is about. It's not about weakness or being soft. So when leaders show compassion towards employees, it makes the employee feel valued and a wanted member of the team. So lack of compassion by the leader can indicate a sense of not being valued. In other words, an employee could feel used. Leaders can often express compassion through tough love. And if you go back up to what I said earlier in that paragraph, it basically was this idea of concern and caring. Okay, so by providing employees critique and exhorting them when they're not performing well, leaders often are perceived as being compassionate or caring and concerned about the employee. Again, it comes down to the nonverbal aspect of, when you initiate the words, "You need to improve your performance because I want you to be successful," and your nonverbals are consistent about showing caring for the employee, then that comes across as compassionate. Critique must be done with a feeling of caring and concern for the employee, or it will come across as insincere, and employees will just, they can't predict you. They feel like they can't please you. They get mad at you. They feel like you're a jerk. A whole bunch of things come out of that process when you lack compassion. Okay, another element or characteristic is competence. Research has shown that employees associate leadership power with expertness. Leaders who are knowledgeable and are perceived competent and all aspects of the position are often granted power by employees. And the operative word here is granted power by the employees. The employees want them to be the leader. That's when you know you start getting inspired. Start putting congruence and compassion and consistency along with competence, and employees start becoming inspired. They not only want to do the job, they want to do it a lot better than they have to do it. They want to excel at it. And this provides a leader with the ability to request unusual and above the call of duty behavior from employees. And a perceived lack of confidence will cause employees, in many cases, to doubt leaders, which can lead to hesitation of job performance. And you see this kind of competence and congruity and compassion and consistency in groups like special operations, special forces, SEAL team, those groups, even though they have a leadership structure, hierarchical leadership structure, really work well. They each see each other as competent in their fields and knowledgeable, and they each care about each other. You often hear them referring to themselves as brothers. So these are things that are happening out there in the real world and happening well. But then you see other situations where they don't happen well at all. And again, competence is something the President of the United States is often cited by many, many people as not having the competence to run a large government. Now, salesman possibly, must be, he made a lot of money doing it. Uh, at least that's the way we think he made it. But the fact is, he's not competent as a president of the United States. He does not have those skill sets. And it is very obvious, not just to the outside world, but his employees and the people who work for him and those he has let go and work for him and how he has let them go. And finally, character, or we could say integrity. Someone who is honest, truthful, takes accountability for their mistakes and doesn't blame others for their mistakes, or maybe takes on the mistakes as a leader of their employees and apologizes for it. That has been a big issue for almost 3 days on one of Donald Trump's assistants making a comment about John McCain. This is exactly what I mean by character. A leader who is reliable, someone who has a sense of ethics and morals, and uh, we have a president who falls down on all those areas. He doesn't care about the ethics or the procedures and the policies and the history and of how to operate our government. He doesn't see it or understand. In fact, he believes he was brought on board to toss that out, all of that out. But unfortunately, our founders wrote that into the Constitution, which pretty makes it impossible for one individual to do that. Can create a lot of headache and a lot of mess, but probably is not going to be successful at it. And we don't even have to talk about the moral side of it. So, the White House and the presidency and everything that's going on there in the government, just an educational laboratory for ineffective and poor leadership and what it results in, which is stagnation and hesitancy and turnover and just a whole host of things. And then not to mention the worldview, how people see you outside of your organization. So there are some characteristics of trust. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that communication is the vehicle used to establish this trust. You have to be a good communicator to be an effective leader. There is just no other way around it. It is the magic bullet. It is the link that holds a chain together. If it breaks, the chain falls apart and it's useless. So just so you understand all those concepts that I talked about on how to communicate and the barriers that had to be removed or dealt with and controlled effectively, uh, without those, you can't build the things about trust. You will have an unbalanced harm situation, and all of those characteristics of trust will be on the negative side of the board. So leaders must work on breaking down those barriers that block effective communication. And then creating a trusting environment requires leadership to work hard towards balancing the scales of harm, like loss versus gain, authority versus subservience, and providing an open, free flowing communication culture. So these are the things. This is the one tool that is, out of all things you can decide to work on, this will deliver you the greatest results and the greatest change in how you're seen as a leader. Now, just to cover quickly, here are those 5 C's. Characteristics of trust: consistency, congruence, compassion, competence, and character. I just want you to understand trust is the key to all organizational effectiveness. Without it, it just falls apart. Excellent leaders unlock the door to trust by learning and applying effective communication. So we've got it's kind of a long session, but it's an important session. So I'm glad I've come back after my faux pas with some perverted guy on the internet. Thank God there was only like a minute of whatever he was doing there. And I have the power to cut it all out. So that's cool. But this is important stuff for you to learn. I want you to take it. I hope you grasp it. There are a lot of ways that if you decide to contact me when we want to get one-on-one here on Zoom, and that way I know who I'm talking to, I'll be glad to dialogue with anybody who's interested in talking about how to use this, how to identify your communication behavior, how to go about the business of changing it, and what makes that change viable for you. So I can tell you this, like I said, once you do that, the biggest part of your leadership barriers will be over. And your people will have a chance because they probably know their job well or they wouldn't be in there. You can make them better, and then using all these tools of building trust and commitment, you can become an inspirational leader. That is the difference. Not just a leader, not a leader with 5 skill sets, the 5 best skill sets, but an inspirational leader that can take people to a different level and consequently the organization to a different level. And of course, that takes you to a different level. Thanks for watching. My name is Victor Vogel, and I host this show every Wednesday, and I will change the model a little bit. Hopefully, I'll provide a way. I try to communicate on Twitter and LinkedIn and my Facebook page. I will determine a way for people to be able to decide if they want to participate on my show. We can do pre-arrangement, bring you on, and maybe 3 or 4, 5 people, even up to 6 people at a time, and have a pretty good dialogue about all this, as opposed to me just sitting here talking to you and I don't have feedback on whether you get that back unless you comment in my blog or on my Facebook page or something like that. Ask questions. Ask me questions. I'll be glad to send information back. I just want you to understand I can't help you too much with one-way communication. Okay. It takes this dialogue, it takes this relationship for you to grasp it, hear it, and feel comfortable with it. Have a good evening. Thanks for watching. I'm Victor Vogel. This is Nightcap Leadership Talk. See you next Wednesday.